And if you had a thought in English, you'd have to translate it into Latin before you could write it down. Kind of a hassle, right? So eventually, over time, what happened was Japanese people started to modify the Chinese writing that they were using to try to convey Japanese concepts with their Chinese characters. And so they started trying to put it in a little bit more of Japanese grammar order, but they encountered a big problem. If you're looking at this symbol, well, there's the way it's pronounced in Chinese, but there's also what it means in Japanese. Which one am I using? Am I using it for its pure phonetic value right now? Or am I using it for its meaning value right now? And how am I supposed to tell which one's which? And that's when hiragana and katakana started to be invented, because they had this problem where they were writing these strings of characters, but some of them they were intending for the meaning inherent in the individual character, and some of them they were actually intending to be pure phonetics to help them convey the parts of Japanese that can't be conveyed with characters, like verb conjugations. You know, janai desu instead of des. Stuff like that. So hiragana and katakana started to get invented. And eventually what developed is this crazy modern hybrid that we have now, which is that you write certain things with their Chinese characters. You write certain things with hiragana or katakana. And when you're looking at a text, let's say a sentence, how you pronounce this has to shift based on how it's being used. So I'll just give you an example using grammar that we've learned. I'm going to write the kanji, but I'm going to give you the furigana so you can see how this works. Okay, so あの人は日本人です. So when you've got a kanji that's like a standalone, all by itself, no other kanji next to it, it's surrounded by hiragana on all sides, that is usually going to be what they call a kunmyomi, which is a Japanese origin pronunciation. The word hito is a Japanese word that did not come from Chinese origin. It came from Japanese origin for person. Okay? Jin comes from a Chinese origin. It's not Mandarin. It's whichever dialect was the predominant dialect of China at the time when that particular kanji was borrowed into the Japanese language, which could have been somewhere in the range of anywhere from 500 something AD all the way up until probably around 12 or 1400 something AD. They were borrowing characters multiple times throughout that huge span of history. So, and if you look at Chinese history, there was a lot of turnover in government during all those years. There were a lot of different emperors, and every time a different emperor took over, especially if it was a new dynasty, he wasn't necessarily a speaker of the same dialect of the previous emperor. So, new administration, new dialect becomes the norm for the government. Okay, so that's part of the reason why you've got not only Jin and Hito, but also Nin, and a couple of other pronunciations for this individual kanji. And then, you know, every other kanji has multiple pronunciations to it also. Bare minimum, 2. One Japanese origin, one Chinese origin. Some of them, half a dozen or more, depending on how many different Japanese words got associated with that kanji and how many different times they borrowed it from China and took a new pronunciation along with it. So, yeah. So kanji can be kind of crazy. On the other hand, it's pictographic sometimes. So if you know what to look for, you can actually see, for example, this kind of looks like a stick figure of a person walking, right? Can you see that shape? So that's an easy way to remember that that one means person, right? And it's faster to write than hito or jin, right? 2 strokes, you're done, right? So some aspects of kanji are actually more convenient. Just wait till we get into kanji numbers. Instead of having to spell out Q, Ju, Q, which is a whole lot of letters, right? You write 1, 2, 3. That's it. That's Q, Ju, Q, 99. Hyaku, 1 symbol. So it's not only sometimes a time saver, it's also often a space saver. Headlines in Japan tend to be very heavy on the kanji because you can get more meaning into your headline. So they tend to truncate the grammar and do not full sentences, but phrases for headlines. You know, English does the same thing, right? How many times do you see a headline that's actually a complete, proper English sentence?
Never.
Almost never, right? But, you know, the Japanese headlines tend to do a lot of abbreviations, a lot of like, you know, if it's international relations, for example, and they're talking about treaty talks between Japan and the United States, they'll use a single symbol kanji that represents Japan, a single symbol kanji that represents America, and then the phrase for relations. 4 kanji to get across the idea of U.S.-Japan relations. That's a long phrase in English that you would have to type out, right? In Japanese, 4 kanji. So it's a huge space saver at times. Novels that have been translated into Japanese from English tend to actually take up less space just because of the kanji condensing things. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of an idea. So these here would be what they call onyomi. Okay, so onyomi are Chinese origin readings, Chinese origin pronunciations of kanji. Kunyomi are Japanese origin readings of kanji. And in your textbook, they actually have a little symbol. When you look at your kanji section of your textbook, every time you've got an onyomi, it uses a little filled-in triangle, and every time you've got a kunyomi, it uses a little white triangle, a little blank triangle. So that's a way of sort of indicating which one's which. The old edition textbook used to actually put the onyomi, since they're of foreign origin, into katakana, but then that would confuse people to make them think that they were supposed to write it in katakana if they weren't writing it in kanji, and that's not the case. Just the, you know, it's a convention that a lot of native speakers use to indicate, oh, this is an onyomi, by putting it in katakana, but then they don't do that in context when it's really being typed. So they just got rid of that because it was confusing students. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to point out is you've got some very simple kanji like this one that are pictographic, right? But then there are also a lot of kanji. You've probably heard horror stories about how complicated kanji can be. A lot of kanji are not a simple pictograph because how do you draw a picture of time, right? Abstract concepts are hard to draw pictures of, right? So what the vast majority of Chinese characters actually are is a combination of 2 parts. There's usually one part that has some kind of pictorial representation or symbolic representation of the concept involved. It may just be sort of a vague idea of it, but it's something that's got some kind of meaning concept to it. So for example, this symbol is actually a combination of several pieces, but that bottom square represents mouth, kuchi, and the lines coming out of it kind of represent like the lines in a speech bubble. And the whole character means to say. So you can break that down into its component parts. A mouth with something coming out of it is speaking. Makes sense, right? You can combine that with a phonetic component. This symbol here on top is the symbol that means the number 5. Who remembers how to say 5 in Japanese? Go, right? This whole character is also pronounced go. Yes, it's the one that means, can you guess? It's pronounced go, and it means something to do with speaking or saying or communication. Language, yeah. You remember? Nihongo, Eigo, Kankokugo, Chugokugo. You remember that go? That's how it looks in kanji. So you see what it's doing? It's actually combining a meaning component and a sound component. Now, remember how old I said a lot of these kanji are? How long ago they came into Japanese from Chinese? Do you think the language is still pronounced the same as it was 1,500 years ago? No. So that means that very few kanji have a pronunciation component that's exact. Okay? The pronunciation component, if you're lucky, is a hint at how it might sound. If you're super lucky, it's an actual match. This one is rare. Okay? But many of them, it's not much of a clue anymore. Maybe it's helpful in Chinese. Maybe the Chinese version is somewhat close. But in Japanese, it may or may not be any help at all. Okay, but that's the composition of the vast majority of kanji, is there's a meaning component and a sound component. Unfortunately, sometimes the sound component just isn't much use to Japanese speakers. So it may or may not help you some of the time, but but that's the composition of a lot of the characters. Another kind of character that is very helpful and useful sometimes is the kind that just has multiple components that all add up to meaning something. So, for example, this symbol originated as that, and then over time it sort of morphed into the modern version. Can anyone guess from the original ancient, we're talking 5,000-year-old symbol here. Can anyone guess what that symbol might have been? Sun, exactly. So this symbol means sun. Okay? If you look at Japan, what's the first symbol in Japan? Sun. What's on their national flag? A sun, yeah, it's meant to be a rising sun, right? Do you know what this one means by itself? Before you put the extra line through, this one originated like that, yeah. Can you kind of see here's the branches, here's the roots. Can you kind of see it a little bit? So this is tree, okay, now tree doesn't really have anything to do with the meaning of the name Japan, but it's not actually the same symbol. There's one extra line here. This line represents the sun just barely starting to peek over the horizon at sunrise. Can you guess what this symbol means?
Origin.
Origin, exactly. Origin. Because, again, origin, abstract concept, you can't draw a picture of origin, right? But you can draw a symbol that is reminiscent of, well, sun's origin, right? Sun coming up where it originates in the east, right? And if you're standing in China, from that perspective, you can't actually see Japan, but if you're looking in the direction of Japan, first thing in the morning, where is the sun rising? Over where you know Japan is, right? East of where you are if you're standing in China, right? So, sun's origin was an ancient Chinese way of referring to Japan. And some American poet translated that as land of the rising sun. Make sense? So have you heard that term for Japan before? You know, and it's their national symbol, their flag, right? That red sun. When is the sun ever that red? Only sunrise or sunset, right? Okay, so sun's origin, Nihon. Or if you want to be super nationalistic and slightly offensive to people in other parts of Asia, Nippon. That was a nationalist word for Japan that was most commonly used and associated with World War II. So in modern Japan, you don't hear it used a whole lot. It's come back a little bit more so with certain nationalist elements in their political system, but most Japanese people call their country Nihon, not Nippon. Okay? So at any rate, so do you kind of see where I'm going with how some characters have a very simple pictograph origin? Some of them combine a pictograph with something else to symbolize something that you can't draw a picture of, right? Some of them are sort of simplified or stylized versions of an original picture. So for example, and I'm not good at drawing, so this is going to look ridiculous, but if you were trying to draw a horse, and here's your flowing mane and your, flowing mane and tail, and 4 legs, if you were a primitive cave person, you might be able to draw something along those lines and have other people know that you meant horse, right? Well, the character for horse in modern times still has the flowing mane and still has the 4 hooves. And that's about all that's left that's recognizable out of the ancient version of a horse picture. And this is not exactly what the ancient version looked like, but it's the closest that I can manage. Okay? And that was part of the problem with ancient characters, was some of them were so artistic that regular people who weren't artistic couldn't reproduce them. And so that's part of how the changes happened over the centuries, because we're talking, some of these characters started literally 3000 BC. So, over time, when it got to be more than just 1 or 2 shamans who were writing stuff down, and it started to spread, and more people were starting to learn to write, symbols changed, partly because they were hard to reproduce, partly because they were still carving into bone and stone at that point, and all these flowing lines would be really hard to carve, right? And by the time they got around to inventing other ways of writing, casting in bronze first, and then later inventing ink and paper, by that time things had already evolved to about this point. So then things just got slightly more stylized after that, but there's not a huge difference between like the characters that were written around the 400 AD mark and the characters that are written today. I can look at something that's written in the style of what they call seal script, which probably dates to around the first few centuries AD, and I can decipher parts of it at least, because if you learn what that seal script looks like, it's stylized, but it's not so drastically different from modern. I'm not good at drawing it, I'm not good at reproducing it, but I can look at it and say, yeah, I can kind of see what that probably means. And the ones from like 400 or 500 AD were already basically the modern style. Just slight stylistic differences by then, between then and modern. Okay, so so what we're going to do today is we're actually going to talk about what some of these symbols are. And again, it's going to be a mixture of some that are very stylized and some that you can kind of see where they came from. But some of these are abstract concepts, so they just had to come up with something. You know, so like this one, for example, small, chisai is the Japanese word for it. Another reading for this is sho. And sometimes you'll see it with the pronunciation ko as well. But there's nothing about this that's inherently small. It's just, they had to come up with something, right? You know, I think the origin of this one, the ancient version of this one, might have been 3 little dots. And over time, the middle dot got longer. Okay, this one, hand, yes. And again, not that close to an actual human hand, but its origin was a little bit closer. There was some curviness to these lines so that it looked a little bit more like the way fingers point upward on a hand, and this kind of represents like the palm and the wrist. But yeah, it's a stretch now to see a hand in this, right? But that's what it means. Okay, so for example, otearai is another word for toire. O te, the O is the honorific O, te, hand, arai means to wash. So otearai is literally honorable place to wash hands.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, this one.
Labor or work.
Labor or work, yes. And what's it remind you of?
Eh.
Katakana right? And also, if you've looked at a building under construction, kind of looks like an I-beam, right? So it kind of makes sense, because this is sort of a basic structure that you might use for construction, right? It's a strong structure, but it's lighter weight than if this were solid, right? So that's, you know, katakana means labor or work. Okay. This is a little bit stylized. When you handwrite it, it looks more like that. So, thread, string, yes. Yeah, and it implies not only an actual thread or string, but also something that's just really, really fine. So that's in a lot of words, not just words relating to cloth and sewing, but also in other words that have something detailed about them. This is an interesting one. Very common component.
Bow.
Yeah.
Like that.
Think
Archery.
archery kind of bow. Think compound bow. You know, when the first ancient people invented your basic bow, right? And then later on they came out with this recurved bow. A lot stronger. If you're strong enough to pull the darn thing, it gets the arrow a lot further with a lot more force, right? And that's basically what this is drawing, right? Can you see it?
It looks like it could be the arrow in the middle, but or
Maybe.
possibly.
Yeah.
I
Well,
would
and
almost.
if you handwrite it, it looks more like that. The extension on these lines is kind of exaggerated in this font. The handwritten version is a lot more like the lines meeting rather than the lines extending beyond each other. Okay, but the bow from bow and arrow, and it's in a lot of compounds that have to do with strength or a variety of other things, you know. I think some of the weapon words probably have it in there too, but it also has to do with strength because, think about it, compared to this kind of bow, this one takes a lot more strength to draw. Now, I don't know if anybody in here has ever done archery, but it's actually hard work to pull that string back on this guy. Okay.
Yeah. Heart.
Heart, yes. And again, it doesn't look a whole lot like an actual human heart, but then again, neither does the heart symbol we use, right? You know, but if you really squint and use your imagination in tilted funny ways, you can kind of see, okay, the bottom part of the heart with the largest chamber, the second bottom chamber, the other two chambers, you know, and it's kind of, you know, that it's got that tilt to it, sort of, you know, because the heart is not like straight up and down vertical in your chest, it's slightly tilted. So, you know, look at an anatomy book. This is not any further than the Valentine's heart, right? And if you look at the ancient form of this character, if you look it up online, you'll see that the very ancient form actually looks like, okay, somebody actually looked at a human heart and tried to draw it a little bit. Okay, so the ancient form of the character actually looks more like an actual heart than this modern form or the Valentine's heart. This is part of a character that means eye in Chinese, but this piece by itself is battle axe or, you know, halberd. It's like that spear that had like a cross piece close to the tip so that, you know, if you stabbed it into somebody, there was something stopping him from just coming all the way up the shaft and killing you too. Yeah. And again, it doesn't look a whole lot like that, but you can kind of see maybe some remnants of the warlike origins of this one and how this got to be part of the character in Chinese that's most commonly used for the pronoun I. I'm not really sure, but I would have to guess that it was probably a phonetic similarity that made it associated with that character rather than a meaning. I don't really think that people were identifying that closely with their battle axes, that they felt like that was their identity, you know.
This is my battle axe.
Yeah.
There are many like it, but this one's mine.
Right. Yeah. So at any rate, this one is actually visual. Yes, this is eye, as in your physical eye that you see with. And yes, it's sort of sideways, but the origin of this one was more on that kind of a slant. It's morphed over time, and it had the iris and the eyelids, basically. And over time, it got more vertical and closed the edges. Okay, so it got squared off. But the modern version of it, basically you draw the top part of the rectangle, then the two interior lines, and then you close the rectangle. Okay, that's the way it's written. And by the way, all the boxy shapes that have something inside of them follow that basic structure. Remember how we talked about stroke order with hiragana and katakana and how that matters? Well, in kanji it matters even more so, because there's so many more of them, and if you get sloppy and run your lines together, the only hope anyone else has of reading what you wrote is if you wrote it in correct stroke order, right? So order is always this downstroke on the left side first, and then the bent line that does the top and the right, okay? And this part is called, by one of my old teachers, he used to call this, first you open the door. Okay, there's your open door, right? Then you invite your friends in. There's your friends coming in your door, and then you close the door. Okay, so you don't shut the door in their face and not let them in, right? Okay, so that was how he explained it, as a way of remembering that stroke order. First you open your door, let your friends in, then you close your door. And all the ones that have an enclosure structure to them, where there's a box around the outside and there's something in the middle, all of them follow that stroke order. Outside, first, in the center, and then close the bottom last. Okay, so that's I, met. Okay, here's another body part one. Anybody? Yep, ear. I know, it's hard to see, but that's like the side of your face and the earlobe maybe. And that's the ear structure with, the little pieces of cartilage that make an interesting little shape on the inside. So, and again, highly stylized. It didn't look like this originally, but yeah. Again, some people separate these two lines out. Some people run them together, but I think that's still the stroke order. It's still basically the same stroke order as other enclosure structure characters. Okay, here we have another body part. A lot lower down, close to the ground.
That's the foot.
Foot, yeah. Ankle bone. Can you kind of see ankle bone and foot bones? There's your heel. There's like the long skinny bones that go to your toes. Again, not anatomical drawing, not super accurate or anything, but you can kind of see a little bit of foot in that.
Kind of
right?
like the little middle one is trying to be the other side of the toes.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, like maybe it's trying to give some perspective, be a little bit 3D, but it's not quite managing. So that's foot. And by the way, this and or just the bottom half of it without the box, one or the other of those are part of a lot of words that have to do with walking, as well as anatomy, like foot and leg type words. Here's an interesting one. Yeah, this is gold. Also the word for money, okane in Japanese, and also the word for metals in general, and a component of most of the specific metal words. So like if you look at a kanji version of the periodic table, the metallic elements are mostly going to have this probably on their left-hand side. Okay, but as far as its origin, I believe this represents the roof of the counting house, and this represents the gold bars piled up inside, and maybe that's the floor of the counting house. Okay.
Isn't it also part of the word like Friday? Isn't it?
Yes,
Friday?
it's in Friday, Golden Day. Yeah, which makes sense because, again, the days of the week in modern Japanese are a modern convention. They're based off of the Western style calendar. They did not do a 7-day week in ancient Japan necessarily. I believe it might have been a 5-day week. And so Friday is an invention of modern Japanese, and it's also payday for most people. So Gold Day makes a lot of sense, right? It's the start of your weekend, and it's the day you get paid, right? Yeah, you go to work, you get paid, and then you go blow it all on the weekend, right? So Golden Day makes sense for Friday.
5-day weeks makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, 5 fingers on your hand, so I think that may be the origin of some of the ancient calendars that did 5 instead of 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is gate or doorway, and it kind of looks like saloon doors, doesn't it? Yeah. So, and again, this is one of the ones that is kind of nice because a lot of the pronunciations from the original Chinese still sort of relate. So this is by itself, it's mon, but then there are a lot of sort of nasal-ish sound pronunciations for a lot of the ones that have this as a component. And when this exists as a component, usually the addition is most commonly in this gap in here. There's a, you draw this part first, and then you draw something in the middle here, and you've got words like open and close that put a piece in here. You've got words like listen, kikimasu, and a variety of other things that put a piece inside. Okay? This is a weird one for them to include, but it's useful because it shows up in a lot of characters.
Well, it looks different from the way that you had it. Is it like short-tailed bird?
Yeah, short-tailed
Small bird.
bird, small bird. So, again, I don't particularly see a bird in this. I don't know what the original ancient form looked like. Probably somewhat more bird-like than this. But this is also a component of one of the kanji in the days of the week. So knowing this ahead of time, learning this first is really helpful when we get to lesson 4 and we have to write this as a part of a more complex kanji. Because if you already know this one, then writing the whole kanji, it feels like, okay, I'm writing this component and this component and this component instead of, 16 random lines, right? 3 components you recognize is so much easier to memorize than 16 random lines, right? Okay. Rain, yes. And it kind of looks like raindrops on a window or something, doesn't it? So that's a pretty easy one to remember. Does anyone recognize this?
This horse.
Yep, that's horse. See, I told you, the only remnants left of anything recognizably horse-like is the flowing mane and the 4 hooves, right? And maybe you could imagine that's the tail, I don't know. There's not a whole lot left of horse, just the mane and the hooves.
Oh.
Yeah.
So these will all carry the same meaning as the Chinese?
Yeah, they're the same meanings in Chinese. The difference is going to be in pronunciation and usage. So like in Chinese, this is ma. In Japanese, it's uma. It's one of the ones where the Japanese pronunciation is actually fairly close. Yeah. And this one, power, strength, chikara. And this one, I believe the origin may have been from the fact that if this line doesn't cut through, it's knife. And if you're holding a knife, you're the one with all the power. So that may
Person
have
holding a knife.
yeah, that may have been the origin. I don't know for sure. I also think that, with some imagination, you could imagine it looking like a person doing this upside down, But I have a feeling that the knife character may have been where this one came from, because they are so closely related in physical form. Okay, this one, I'll give you a hint.
Right hand.
Right hand is one of the meanings for this character, and it also, as a standalone character, at least in Japanese, and actually in Chinese too, means again. As in, I'm going to do that again. Okay? So, how again and right hand got to be conflated, I have no earthly idea, but that's what you got. Okay, this one I mentioned before, anyone remember?
Mouth.
Mouth, yeah. And it kind of looks like an anime character's open shouting mouth, right? Ah. Right? We talked about this one.
Yeah.
Sun. Yeah, its origin was sun, and then by association, it also came to mean day or date, because those are abstract concepts that are defined by the sun, right?
Would you put it with like the now character would it be today?
Yes, that is how you write today. Kyo is written with kanji for ima and this kanji. Yeah, nowadays. Kyo. Yeah. And if you put it with the days of the week character, nichiyobi is actually sun day, literally. The sun day. Okay, and speaking of days of the week, this is month or moon. Its origin was a crescent moon picture. And you kind of see a crescent moon in here with a couple of clouds floating across. That's the origin of that one. It started out as a crescent moon with little clouds floating. Because you had to have some way of differentiating moon from sun, right? If you drew a circle again, looks like sun. How am I supposed to tell which is which, right? But if you draw a crescent moon, you don't get a crescent sun a whole lot,
No.
right? You know, only during an eclipse, in which case a lot of ancient people were probably cowering in their caves because they were scared of it anyway. So, sun is that one, this one's moon. Notice that it is open at the bottom now, and there's two lines in the middle, but the bottom is open. So contrast that with sun, which has one line in the middle and one line to close the bottom, and I, which has two lines in the middle and a line to close the bottom. Okay? So in terms of number of strokes, it has the same number of strokes as sun. But in terms of shape, it's as long and skinny as I, but with a gap on the bottom instead of closed off. Okay, so just like we had to be careful of certain hiragana or katakana that looked alike, we have to be careful of kanji that look alike and not let ourselves get confused by them. What's this one? Tree, yay! So, and it's also wood day, Thursday, ukiyobi. Okay. Rice field, yes, which if anybody has ever looked at like a bird's eye view of rice fields, they kind of look like this. They section them with these big earth structures like mini walls, so that each segment is level and you can control how much water is let in or out of each piece of your rice field. So they section it like that.
Show the stroke order.
Yeah. Okay. Make some space. So stroke order for tumble. So this is top. Okay, so it starts out the same. Remember what we talked about for, so you open your door. Okay, when you let your friends in, you do the horizontal before the vertical. And then you close the door. Okay, so to write that out. Like that. Okay. And let's see. So in terms of direction, like that. And that's another general rule of thumb, that horizontal usually goes before crossing vertical. Okay, so if you've got a cross shape, it's the opposite of an English T. Usually when we write a T, we write the vertical first and then we cross it, right? That's why they talk about crossing your T's, right? But in Japanese, it's the reverse. It's usually the horizontal first, then the vertical. Okay. So for example, the number Ju, you remember 10? Ju, it's a cross shape, like that. Okay, so it's actually horizontal and vertical. Okay, remember this one? We talked about it. Say. Remember, this is your mouth, and this is like the speech bubble lines.
Or sound waves.
Yeah.
Or sound waves, yeah, or like like that little sound symbol in your textbook,
Yeah.
you know, it could be like that. Or some people think of like, if you've ever lived in a cold place, with vapor coming out of your mouth when you speak on a cold day. You know, if you've ever lived someplace that gets snow, you've seen that experience, you know, experienced that. Okay, this one looks like eye with two little lines, but it's actually
Shellfish.
shell, actually, shell.
Oh.
Cowrie shell.
Yeah, cowrie shell. So if you think about it, it kind of looks like, you know, you can kind of see, have you seen the kind of shell that looks like it's kind of this kind of a shape? It's got some lines to it like that. You can kind of see that there, can't you?
Okay.
And sometimes this end will have a little weird thing sticking out at that end. Or that could be the animal that lives inside, I don't know. No. So that's shell. And this, interestingly enough, besides meaning a literal shell, it also is in some of the words to do with commerce and trade and money, because shells were a form of currency in prehistoric times. So there's that association. Does anyone recognize this as being, yeah, that's like the bottom part of foot, right? Remember that? Foot without the square? And this top piece actually means soil. So when you put your foot on the soil, you're walking, right? It means, in Japanese it actually is used for hasiru, to run, but in Chinese it's zo, to walk, and its general meaning is something to do with that motion, and it's in a variety of other characters. Okay.
That, like enclosure.
Yes, enclosure. It's almost a trick question, because the smaller one was mouth, right? But this is the bigger one, because it does mean like enclosure or border, and it generally has something inside of it. This is not a standalone character. Kuchi, mouth, is a standalone character. It exists not only to indicate a human mouth, but also to talk about things like entrance and exit. Iriguchi and Deguchi are two signs you'll see all over the place in Japan, entrance and exit. Okay, but this one is in things like the koku in Kankoku and Chugoku. This is the Goku in Chugoku and the Koku in Kankoku. Hear that pronunciation shift, Koku to Goku? Just depends on what sound came before. But either way, it means country. So you've got like the border around the outside, right? And then this piece by itself means king. And then this extra dot turns it from king to jade. Jade as in, the stone, jade. And
So the king and his money or something.
yeah, the king and his money and inside the border. And this is actually a simplified character. This is not the ancient form. This is a modernized form of the word for country. The older form just isn't used in modern Japanese any longer. Taiwanese people still use it. There's this interesting dynamic where people in mainland China use a lot of simplified characters. People in Taiwan prefer all the traditional characters. They haven't simplified stuff down. They consider simplified characters to be sort of like text-speak spellings. They're convenient for shorthand, but if you're truly educated, you just don't use them. So Taiwanese people kind of don't like the simplified. Japan has a hybrid. They've simplified some of the characters, but not as many as mainland China. So they use some characters in their original full forms like Taiwan does, and they use use some characters like this one in their simplified forms.
Wasn't the communists mostly, was their idea?
Yeah, well, it was the communists' idea to simplify it as many as possible to make literacy more attainable for a larger percentage of their population. Because before they switched over, I think their literacy rate was somewhere in the like 30 to 50% range. It was really, really low. And definitely having a simpler writing system helped them turn that around. But, you know, part of it's just having a good education system in place. You know, huge country, a lot of poverty, it was hard for them to get a good education system going. At any rate. So, but Japan, for whatever reason, chose to simplify some of their characters and not others. So we've got this hybrid. So
That's not the character for up.
no, it's not the character for up. Up would be like that.
So it means,
So like yo.
so it just means ground then.
This is soil or ground, yes. And the origin of this one is probably that these represented little leaves on a sprout. And so, you know, again, you can't draw a picture of the ground and have anybody know what you mean by it, right? I mean, you can try, but nobody's going to have a clue what you're drawing. It's like a losing game of Pictionary, right? But sprout is something that's just starting to come up out of the ground, and it's very close to the ground, so you can kind of symbolize ground with the picture of a sprout, right? So that's where this one originated. But it's actually ground or soil or dirt, earth, those kinds of meanings. It's in, for example, a Japanese word that means ceramics, because you use earth and clay to make your ceramics, so this is in that one.
Yeah, evening.
Evening, okay, so let's say you're drawing your sun, okay, and then you're watching sunset over a mountain. Can you see it? So that's sunset, sunset or evening. Okay. Sometimes also means like twilight, that time of day. Okay.
Big or large?
It's this big. How many people have seen like a 4-year-old kid or something trying to describe something that was huge from their perspective? It was this big, yeah? That's that exact outline. Am I right? It's person with arms stretched out to the sides.
When you're
Right.
writing this one, do you have to have like that little gap?
Actually, when I write this one, again, it's horizontal before vertical, so you actually do the outstretched arms first, and then you do person, and it does not have to have a gap. Okay, so, and yeah, one of the main Japanese pronunciations for this is o-ki, and sometimes just a double O. This is one of those rare ones that's actually spelled O-O, not O-U, and it's in names like Osaka also. Right.
So like Daigaku would be like big
Yes.
school.
Yes, exactly. Daigaku is literally big or great. This great's another translation for this one. And the gaku part is to learn or to study. So great studies, Daigaku. Okay. Woman, yeah. So again, this one came from a picture that I cannot reproduce to save my life. But it apparently was a picture of a woman in a kneeling position wearing a traditional Chinese gown that had those extra long sleeves, and she would put her hands inside of her sleeves like this, and that was considered like a very demure womanly pose in ancient China. So that was kind of the original picture, and then over time it obviously evolved a lot. So that's what we have now. Okay, one of my first Chinese-speaking friends who tried to teach me this character back in like 8th grade said, "See, she's got wide hips." That because she's woman. You know, that wasn't the origin, but that was the way that she tried to explain it. So however you can remember it, it's up to you. This one's child. It looks a little bit like the one for the gaku in Daigaku, but that has an extra piece on top. This is just the bottom half of that.
Yeah.
But this is child, kodomo, and again, you've got the big head, you've got the arms waving around, and then this is representing like the bottom half of the baby is all swaddled up in a blanket. You know, lots of cultures wrap the baby's body, and you know, the legs are like all bunched up tight against themselves, because infants actually like that, because it feels comforting, because that's how they were in the womb. So, but then they leave the arms free sometimes because they're not in the womb anymore and they want to touch everything and wave their arms around. So, yeah, that's kind of the origin of that one. Measurement, it's actually a short measurement similar to an inch. So, you know, think like ancient Chinese version of an inch. And it kind of looks like a protractor or something, doesn't it? So it looks like a tool you would use for some sort of measurement, right? But it actually means inch or measurement.
Who invented the protractor?
I'm not sure.
Like, did they do it?
I wouldn't be at all surprised if China came up with it first. They invented a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily know to give them credit for in the West.
Probably either them or Da Vinci.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is a different style of writing person, okay? When you handwrite it, usually the connecting stroke is a lot lower down, but
I've never seen it written like that.
this is just a font. This is a particular font, but writing it from about here is more normal for handwriting. Okay, so that's person, do. Okay, now I've got some that are paired. Does anyone know why I paired these?
Different versions.
Different versions of person. Okay, so if you're looking at this, this is the standalone, like hito, jin, nihon jin, stuff like that. Okay, this is a component of a larger character. So a larger character could be here, but if it's got this piece to it, it probably has something to do with people. Okay, so for example, the pronouns in Chinese, they don't get used in Japanese much, but the pronouns for you and he and they and plural you all use this component, and then there's something else here for those pronouns for you and for he. Okay. Anyone remember I mentioned this one? Knife, yes. Which again, it doesn't look that much like a knife anymore, but, oh, there it is. This is another version of the knife, and this one actually to me looks more like knife than this one does.
Sure.
You see it? It's got like that, the channel that Japanese swords had. So these are, again, two versions. This is a standalone word that means knife. This is a component that is a piece of a lot of other characters, not just ones having to do with cutting things, but also a lot of other characters that may be more abstractly related to the concept of knife in some way. Okay. Yep, this one's water, mizu. Okay, and again, the origin of this one is more like
Yeah, it's a hieroglyph.
flowing water in a stream. Okay, and this is
Water.
also water. This is called the 3-dot water radical. It's a component of a lot of characters that have something to do with water. So words for things like to swim, and words for a variety of liquids that aren't pure water have this component to them. So like soy sauce has this piece, and most sauces and most juice type drinks, if they have a Chinese character name to them, have this. Okay.
What's that? Wait, oh, it's right here, means show.
Yeah, to show, as in I'm showing this to you. So, and if you break it down, what's that bottom part?
Small.
Small. And anyone know what the top part is?
2.
2, the number 2, right? Ni. And it's also katakana ni, right? So, 2 small things that I want to show you, might be a mnemonic at least. I'm not sure what the origin of this one really was. But, you know, you can imagine, you know, like a little kid who's got 2 little things in their hand and they want to show them to you. Okay, some of these are not paired with the correct ones, but to eat, yes. And once again, I don't know what the actual origin of this one was, but some people, if they're being really creative, can see like some sort of monster person with chopsticks shoveling food into their mouth. With a roof over their head, yes. So you're in the restaurant apparently, and you're some kind of weird shaped monster person, because that's not a very human-like shape there, and you're using chopsticks to shovel it in.
Isn't that similar to shop or something? I don't remember how shop went.
No,
No?
you say not really.
But
But
like bookstore or something? I thought that it looked similar for some
Yeah.
reason, I don't know.
no, but this
Like
is
part of it.
the kanji for taberu, to eat, but it's also in words like shokudo, dining hall, and a lot of other components. And this also exists as a side, a half. I don't think I have a character for it. But if you draw this sort of skinnier and off to the side, it becomes a component for words like to drink, rice, meal, things like that. Okay, we're almost out of time, so I just want to get through the rest of these. So this one is
Clothing?
yeah, clothing. Okay, and it kind of looks a little bit like it, especially if you draw it the handwritten way. That's so stylized. I think the origins, here's your head, your shoulders, and like, you know, I'm not good at drawing, but I think the origin of this was something along the lines of like this kind of a traditional clothing. You know, the ancient Chinese clothes are not the same as what you're used to seeing. The Mandarin collar and the frog clasps and all, that's a modern Chinese style of dress. So it's actually Manchurian. But ancient Chinese clothing, they wore like a wraparound top usually, and then men sometimes had pants on the bottom, women usually had a skirt on the bottom, and there was some kind of a sash that connected it all. And so the top actually looked a little bit like a kimono, and it had that kind of a structure to it. So, you know, so you can kind of see where maybe that was sort of reminiscent of what ancient Chinese clothing looked like. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm just going to do a few more real quick.
Fine silk.
Fine silk. So remember, this part meant fine thread or small this part also meant small, put them together, fine silk. Okay, and this is sort of a, whatchamacallit, a side version of the same thing. So you can see that when it's handwritten, it's a little different than the stylized version. But this, again, is a common component of a lot of characters. Oh, this one. Fire. Yep. Okay, fire. And this is, again, a common component that generally occurs on the bottom, not the side, that indicates fire. Think like coals, hot coals under something. This is the bottom, for example, of the word for black, because if you think about it, if you scorch something in the fire, it turns black, right? So this is fire, and you can kind of see like the sticks and the flames there, you know, like you built a little tripod with your sticks and then you lit it and the flames are coming up off of the sticks. So, and this is like a bed of hot coals. Okay, so here's that side piece for to eat. So when it occurs as a side piece, it shows up. This one is hand, the side piece. This is the side piece for heart. And then I always get these two backwards. The one that looks like a nah is to show, I believe, and the one with the extra line is clothing. Okay. So they're very similar looking, but the net one is show, and the other one is clothes. And those occur again in a lot of characters that just relate in some way to those concepts. Okay, so if you can't print these out, at least like write down the main ones, the large ones. One of the things I need to do is the one that has some stuff blacked out, the version that's published or not? No? Okay, because some of these are Chinese simplified versions that you don't need to know. So I need to repost, but it takes a while to get anything scanned around here. So in the meantime, yeah, just try to learn to recognize them and work on practicing how to write them. But you don't need to worry about pronunciations at this point. Okay, the pronunciations that are in this packet are actually Chinese anyway, because I took this out of a Chinese textbook, which is why. So.